DEI or DENI all the time. I've heard other people add different ones. You guys added the B.
Yeah.
Why B? I know it stands for belonging.
Yes, it does.
Why did you add that one?
Yeah, so in the work that I do, so I didn't also mention this. When I have the time and opportunity, I also facilitate different kinds of programming through the Institute for Sport and Social Justice. And so there's a couple of different umbrellas that fall within the Institute. One of them is gender violence prevention training. So we do a lot of work in that space for, appropriate workplace behavior and interactions, all of those different things. But then we also have shifted into DEIB. And so in our work in building the DEIB curriculum, belonging was something that continued to come up. Because at the end of the day, and so this is another thing, and I'm connecting the two. When people, at least the folks that I've worked with, hear DEI, most of the time, they're going to go to two places, gender or race.
Yes.
And that is not what DEI is about. It's a part of DEI, but diversity, equity, and inclusion is really about creating spaces where people have a diversity of thought, experiences, where they feel included, where we're treating people equitably, like all of those different things. It's how we show up for one another, and how people feel like they belong. Are we creating spaces that people feel comfortable and authentically who they are, and do they belong in our spaces? And so DEI the B is really after the equal sign, right? But it is a part of what we're doing to get everybody to understand that we're doing the diversity, we're being intentional with equity and inclusion so that people feel like they belong.
Right.
Because when people feel like they belong and they feel like they're valued, then you're going to maximize the output that they're willing to give. So that's where the B comes from for us. But side note, even when I brought up DEIB internally at Texas Tech, what I was realizing, and it didn't take long, but once I got it, I'm like, okay, pay attention to this. When I would talk about DEIB, or when DEIB would be on an agenda, automatically people would get stiff. And automatically the walls would go up and assumptions would happen and opinions would already be formed. And so I thought, okay, so we are not going to be able to get to some real conversations, and people aren't really conceptualizing what it is that we're trying to do, especially from my perspective, coming from a Black female, then, here she goes. Here she goes again. Here we go. We're going to be talking about race. And I'm in a room with people who don't look like me, right? Except for one other person, a female person of color. And so I just thought, all right, y'all, I went back to my core committee, and I said, we need to name what we're doing now. Because if we don't name it, we're not going to get to move the needle. So they were like, no, we don't need to compromise what we're doing. That just feels like we're selling out. No, it feels like we're adjusting to our environment in order to get where we need to go. And so we came up with the Red Raider Way, which I stole from the Cubs and the Cubs Way. But what I realized is as I started referring to our work through the Red Raider Way, there was much more receptivity, or much more reception, to what we had to say. It was just the balloon had deflated, and people were willing to come to the table and talk.
Yeah, so there's so many things about what you just said that I find not just fascinating, but that we've experienced and we're seeing, right? As we've started this process, I have appreciated, and I mean that, the amount of questions that have come my way. Because it does mean there's interest. It does mean there is there's a desire to understand where you're going. But I would also say, and not that this is bad, in some of the questions, there were some assumptions about but what about this? Where's this really headed? And so to be able to take a step back, to have Dave Gillis and Dave Marcinkowski, who is, Dave G is our CEO, Dave Marcinkowski is one of our founders and a partner, to have them take a step back and go, okay, hold on. The agenda is just simply about how you take care of each other.
Yes. Being good teammates, being good neighbors.
That's it. Yep. And not just take care of each other, but with us, and y'all are in a very similar business, but you have people that you take care of who buy from you. Yeah. And so how you show up for them and take care of them. Yeah. That there is a human in front of you who deserves ultimate respect. That's it. Yeah. full stop.
Yeah.
So I find that really interesting. But you also bring something up about the way language works in us.
Yes.
And we hear, yes, there's a power in language. There's a power in the way that we like, I don't like that word, or that has a connotation here, because I'm with you, and we've seen it here at Madera. People ask questions about race, and they ask questions about gender. And I kind of turned it back on one guy, and I said, and I love him, but I turned it back on him. I said, how do you treat introverts in a meeting? That's the same. That's a holistic conversation, right? So let's talk about the language piece for a second.
Okay.
How have you navigated helping normalize the language and then also coming up with common language that allows us to know? Because if you and I may be saying the same thing, but if our connotations ain't the same,
Right.
it's going to be weird
Yeah.
or hurtful or fear-driven or something. How did you navigate the language piece here? Like I said.
So that is an everyday practice for me.
Okay,
so
keep
that's
going.
not even professionally driven, right? Like as a minority and a double minority, in order to survive and advance, you have to learn how to assimilate. You have to learn how to listen to people and hear what kind of language they're using in order to then be able to jump into conversations or make people feel comfortable. Like I spend almost every day trying to figure out how I make the people around me feel comfortable so that I can then hopefully feel heard. And so it's just an innate skill that some of us have that are minoritized groups. In specifically, I'm not saying everybody can't have those skills too, but it's just something that is ingrained in me because it was a mode of survival to listen, to understand, and then to navigate.
So I want to highlight what you just said.
Okay.
And the reason I want to highlight this, particularly as I think about our people here, you brought this up as you used the term double minority, and my assumption is you're bringing up the fact that you're a black and a female. But the amount of people who are in some minoritized demographic, even if it's just the introverts in the room, who are trying to navigate, how do I navigate these personalities so that I can be heard? And so every minoritized group enters in some form or fashion very similar to what you're talking about, because they're going, I'm not a part of the majority because I am quieter, or just to use that as an example. And so for our folks, I would highlight hey, pay attention to the types of groups that are minoritized, because they're navigating not being on the loudest team in the room.
100%. The creating of common language is going to be a little more complex and a labor of love. What I realized as we were creating and building out our strategic plan was, number one, really, again, it's about how we show up with one another. There were some disconnections between perceptions and realities for everybody within the athletic department, including our student athletes. And that in order for us to be able to have some really important conversations that fall under the DEIB umbrella, that are not just race and gender or sexual orientation related, we first had to have the skills to be able to have those conversations. And so we have created this concept of development days. So once a month, all of our staff, coaches, student athletes, everybody is going to be going through this same curriculum. And it's curriculum we've identified that will happen over the course of 7 months within the academic year. And so through that, my hope is, one, that we are going to create some common language, and we're giving people some spaces to be able to build relationships in a different way with the people that they serve or the people that report through them. And then also to be able to just create some common spaces. So not only common language that we can all use and understand, but also common spaces, and then just some references that we can all get on the same page with.
And that does not happen, and I love what you're doing, but I want to tell people this, because I think oftentimes when we start talking about DEI or DEIB, we have these abstract, they're abstract even illustrations that we use to talk about this, whereas what you guys are doing is you're creating shared experience. And when it's shared experience, there's a person and there's a story and there's an interaction that takes place, and there is a giving and a taking of personhood.
Yes.
Where I take that story with me. And I think too often in our conversations, and like I said, you and we've had this conversation before, we're having conversations about this, but really what we're doing is we're having conversations about people that we don't have shared experience with.
Right.
And that's why it's so necessary to coming back to the simplicity of what you're saying, the listening.
Yeah.
Finding
with
safe
an
places.
Open mind.
Yes, and finding safe places for people to just talk.
Yes.
And tell their story.
Yeah.
I love that piece of what you guys are doing. I'm gonna take us on another direction here.
Let's do it.
So as the senior woman administrator for this title, I know that there are a lot of things that come into play for that.
Yeah.
But you get to speak to something that we've not had on the podcast just yet, because so far we've had Kevin McConaughey, we've had Corey Powell, who I love both of them dearly, but they're not women. So there we go. Yeah. You get to give us another perspective on some gender things that oftentimes males, especially in male-dominated businesses or in male-dominated departments, we have blind spots.
Yes.
What have you learned as you've done the Title IX stuff, as you've kind of worked with Texas Tech and kind of helped them find a healthy respect here? Talk to me a little bit about some of the things that we can do to bring more gender equity into the conversation.
Yeah. I think that the first thing that needs to happen is to take a step back and take some inventory about why you need to even have the conversation in the first place.
Keep going.
So, I think a lot of times we just jump to we need more women, so let's bring them to the table. Well, do you have the infrastructure to support these women? Do you have the infrastructure and the policies or even just the thought leaders around the table to understand that if you're going to bring anybody to the table, they should be treated like anyone else that's sitting at the table? And so understand, if you could take a step back and do some real inventory and introspection on, other than just doing it because it feels right, it seems right, or we've got to do it because somebody's telling us we need to. Yeah. Why else are we valuing bringing new people on? What is the value in having females at the table? What is the value in this group by doing something differently than we've always done it before? Yeah. And so just understanding the why first, creating a how next, and then going out and identifying the right people too. Don't just go out and pick anybody that fits a description. Go out and find the person that's going to help make you better based on what you need. Yeah. And so some of those things I think need to be a little more thoughtful than just, okay, well, we need more women, let's go get them. Well, are you setting them up for failure or success when you're bringing them in?
Well, and what you're talking about with the infrastructure I think is huge, because it's, again, just because you have diversity doesn't mean you have inclusion. Yes. Just because you have diversity doesn't mean you have belonging.
Right. Or equity.
And so I think that's huge that you're bringing up the infrastructure. And then I would argue, for the sake from and we've talked about this multiple times, but from the sake of business perspective and from the sake of building a culture. The journey to have the infrastructure for that is worth it.
Yes, 100%. It'll pay dividends.
Absolutely. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So what blind spots are there? What blind spots, or let me say it this way, what blind spots do you see when it comes to trying to be more gender inclusive?
Yeah, I think just not taking the time to understand any biases that are brought into the process. So again, you can have the greatest of intentions, but if you don't understand the perspective and the lens with which you're looking at why it's important to do this or how you're going to bring women to the table, then I think that that's a blind spot in and of itself. I think gender norms and just falling in line with gender norms is really a tough one too. If you do wind up bringing in a really highly qualified female and they're sitting at the table, asking them to take notes, or not opening up for spaces for them to be able to speak like everybody else, and really paying attention to how people are responding and listening when asked a question. How are we asking questions? What kind of meeting infrastructures do we have? How are we amplifying these folks? And then also, though, treating them equitably. So don't treat them different because they're women.
Right.
treat them like you would treat anybody else, but understand that there are some nuances that you, again, as blind spots or biases that you might be bringing to the table that might keep you from really fulfilling the ambition or the intention of what you were trying to do to begin with. So, I would just say, like, in terms of the blind spots, one, being really careful about the positions that you put people in, and that being under the gender norm umbrella, the responsibilities that you give them, the amount of money that you pay them, and then also just understanding the different dynamics that may come with men and women, but stereotypically with women. Two things come to mind that I have said or experienced in my journey as a female in a mostly male-dominated business. But, there have been times throughout my career that I've had to tell some of my counterparts, like, I do what you do every day at work, and then I go home and I do what your wife does at home every day. And, that's based on what I hear from them explaining what their wives do. I'm not making judgment or, making it a generalized comment, but that's what I have to tell people, because sometimes they don't understand that, like, I am grinding just like you, but then I'm going to go pick up my son, and then I'm taking him to do things. I'm cooking dinner. I'm doing those things too. Yep. So when you go home and you kick up your feet and, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? I mean, I've asked so many questions. Like, I was trying to file for homestead exemption once, and I asked one of my coworkers, I'm like, hey, where do I find the homestead exemption stuff? And he was like, you need to call my wife. And I was like, oh my God, okay, whatever. But the other incident that I had as a female in a male-dominated space that was different for me was when I found out that I was pregnant. So I found out that I was pregnant, and I was super excited. I'll never forget. But my mom, my family, we were all talking, and then I kind of paused, and they were like, what's wrong? And I said, well, now the people at work are going to treat me like a woman. And my mom was like, so what if they've been treating you like prior to? And I'm like, well, no, let me explain. Because when I wasn't pregnant, I could go have drinks after work. I could go play golf during the day. I was one of the guys. I could fit in fairly well, and it just didn't always, my gender wasn't always at the forefront of things, because again, I could assimilate fairly well, and I could, I was an athlete. So, like, here we go. We can have those conversations and we can have those moments that they would have. So it was very easy to navigate professionally. But as I continued to transform physically to prepare for bringing Parker into the world, I mean, there were changes. I'm like, so now I'm not going to get invited out for drinks because they're going to assume I don't want to go or I can't go. And, they're going to ask me all kinds of questions, like, hey, are you okay? Do you need to sit differently? Do you need whatever? And it's just like, I just want to be able to still come to work. Yeah. But now this is going to be an added thing that is going to be incorporated into comments, assumptions, perceptions about me, my work, all of those different things. Yep. And so it was really an interesting dynamic. I mean, I was lucky. I was sitting around a table of men that were like, oh my gosh, but now what do we do? Like, Brandi, do you need some food? Or we were so rude, we didn't even offer you a snack. Or, can I carry your bag? And I'm like, I'm not dying. I'm just having a child. Like, it's fine. But, some of those things were interesting. But that's another thing that it brings me to this. And this may not be a part of this conversation, but I think it's important to share, is another part of my journey that I didn't really quite appreciate until Parker was older was the aspect of maternity leave. I took a really unique maternity leave. My boss was very forgiving and nice and flexible, but there were times where after I had Parker and I was still on maternity leave, that, like, if there was a meeting that I needed to be a part of, or there were people that were in town that my boss wanted me to get in front of, he's like, hey, sorry to ask you this, but can you come in? And in college athletics, like, sometimes that just happens. You can't control all of the circumstances. And so I'm like, well, it's me and Parker. And he's like, just bring him. So, people are holding Parker. I'm holding him while we're talking in the meeting. But, I didn't appreciate how tired I was, that your mind is in all different kinds of places and your body is truly trying to get itself back to normal after conforming and preparing to bring a child into the world. But you're still expected to to work and show up and perform and do all these things. And not that I didn't, because that was just the mode that I was in, but in some moments of reflection, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
That was a lot. That is a lot to do and expect of people. And, you know, if you haven't been through some of those moments where you're sleep deprived or you're just trying to multitask and think about 8 different things at the same time, like it can be taxing for people. So it's helped me as a leader to just give people more grace and understand that you don't have to be a mother or had to have a baby or any of those things, but like everybody carries something. People are taking care of ailing parents or partners or just going through life. And so, you know, grace is really important.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, and all of it. And I'm glad you did go the maternity route, because I think when we start talking about equity and we start talking about inclusion specifically, providing benefits that are equitable, the understanding of how being a full-time mom and a full-time employee impacts both places. And should be responded to with grace. And we can be highly driven business-wise and highly gracious with one another at the same time.
Yes.
All of those things can come together.
Yes.
And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. There are just so many women, I think, in our companies that I wanted to make certain you could say some of those things so they felt like they had a voice in this conversation. And so I just thoroughly appreciate you bringing that up. That's all I have for you. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thoroughly appreciate you coming in. My conversations with you are always fun. I have an absolute blast. I love that you love sports, because that makes it fun too. And so I just wanted to say thanks again for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is so cool. I've learned so much from you in the time that we've been able to get to know each other. And like, I just have a great appreciation for what you do and how you show up and what you bring to the table. I mean, I see you on campus at Texas Tech supporting us in the Black Cultural Center and just like being a champion for all people. So thank you for what you do.
That means a lot. Mid-Dare Companies, that's been this episode. We'll have another one for you soon. Thank you guys so much for watching.